The countryside has a strange way of making you feel both at peace and on edge at the same time. Endless fields, silent woods, isolated houses, they seem calm, even beautiful, until you find yourself alone with nothing but the sounds of the wind, the creak of the trees, and the unsettling feeling that you're not truly alone. For generations, the most chilling horror stories haven't come from busy cities or crowded towns. They've come from the quiet, forgotten places where no one is watching. Today, we're sharing 3 true countryside horror stories that will make you think twice before wandering too far from home. Each story comes from real people who swore their experiences were true, though by the end you'll wish they weren't. The first story comes from a man named Robert, a farmer from Iowa, who lived most of his life surrounded by cornfields and endless skies. Robert wasn't the superstitious type. He believed in hard work, long days, and the simple life. But what happened on his family's land one October evening changed his perspective forever. It started with a sound, a low humming noise that drifted across the fields as the sun was setting. Robert was working on his tractor when he first noticed it. The sound was rhythmic, almost like a deep chant carried by the wind. Thinking it was some old farm machinery echoing from a neighbor's property, he ignored it. But as the days passed, the humming returned every evening, always at sunset, always coming from the same patch of cornfield. One night, curiosity got the better of him. He grabbed his flashlight and headed toward the sound. As he walked into the cornfield, the air grew unnaturally still. The humming grew louder, more intense, vibrating in his chest. Suddenly, he reached a small clearing and froze. Standing there in a perfect circle were 7 figures dressed in long, dark robes, their faces hidden beneath hoods. They swayed gently, hands raised, whispering in a language Robert couldn't understand. The sight was so surreal, Robert couldn't move. Then, as if sensing his presence, the figures stopped and turned to face him. All at once. No words, no movement. Just silence. Robert turned and ran, stumbling through the corn, the sound of whispering following him the entire way. When he finally reached his house, the humming stopped. That night, and every night after, Robert locked every door and window before sunset. Though he never saw them again, sometimes he'd wake up to find strange symbols drawn in the dirt outside his porch. Symbols that looked eerily similar to what he'd seen in the field. Robert never spoke of it again, except to say, "Not everything out here wants to be found. Think that's unsettling? Wait till you hear this next one." A story that proves sometimes what's stalking you isn't from this world at all. This second account comes from Eva, a writer who had one goal: finish her first novel. Seeking solitude and inspiration, she rented a small cabin deep in the woods of a remote mountain village in Vermont. It was the perfect escape. No internet, no distractions, just the silence of snow-covered trees and the crackle of a fireplace. For the first few nights, everything went exactly as she hoped. The cabin was peaceful, the villagers were distant but polite, and her creativity flowed. But then came the storm. One night, a heavy snow rolled in, burying the village in white and muffling every sound. The wind howled like a creature in pain. As Eva sat by the fire, wrapped in a blanket with her manuscript in hand, she suddenly heard soft footsteps on her porch. They were slow, rhythmic, pacing back and forth. She assumed it was a deer or maybe a fox seeking shelter. But when she looked outside, her heart skipped a beat. There were human footprints circling the cabin. Not approaching, not leaving, just looping endlessly around her home. She stepped out with a flashlight and called into the dark. No answer, just the wind and falling snow. Stranger still, the footprints didn't lead to the road or the forest. They started at her door, made several laps around the cabin, and disappeared. Trying to stay calm, Eva reasoned it must be a local prank, but the next night it happened again. The footsteps returned, circling. Then a knock, slow, deliberate. When she opened the door, no one was there, but etched into the wooden frame beside it was a symbol sharp, jagged, and twisted in a way that made her stomach turn. Something primal in her recoiled at the sight. Terrified, she called the sheriff. He arrived the next morning, but found no footprints. No tracks, nothing, just the symbol. When she asked the neighbors, they grew quiet. One elderly man finally spoke. "Respect the Watchers?" According to local folklore, the woods belonged to beings known only as the Watchers. They marked those who noticed them. Ignoring the signs, they said, only led to worse. Eva left a week later. She never finished the novel, and even years on, she still dreams of footsteps in snow circling, waiting, watching. Before we head into the last story, let me ask you this. Have you ever walked into a place and felt like you weren't supposed to be there? Like the very land itself was pushing you away? Because that's exactly how this final story begins. And trust me, it's the kind of story that stays with you. Our final story comes from Charles, an old fisherman from a rugged coastal village in Maine. A man weathered by storms and hardened by decades at sea, Charles wasn't easily rattled. He'd seen everything the ocean could throw at a man, until one eerie summer evening changed everything. The sea was unnaturally calm that night, as if holding its breath. The water mirrored the crimson sky, painted by the setting sun. Alone on his boat, Charles was mending his nets, enjoying the peace, when something beneath the surface caught his eye. A pale, motionless shape hovered just below the waterline. At first, he thought it was a corpse. Leaning over the edge, trying to get a better look, Charles suddenly saw the figure begin to rise, slowly, deliberately, until a woman's face emerged. Her skin was deathly pale, her eyes pitch black and unblinking. She stared into him like she knew everything he'd ever done. Then her mouth opened. "Come with me." The words were wet, gurgled, barely a whisper, but they chilled Charles to the bone. Without a second thought, he pulled up his nets and fired up the engine, tearing back to shore without ever looking back. When he told his story, the other fishermen turned pale. They whispered about the Drowned Maiden, a ghost said to haunt the bay. Some believed she was the spirit of a woman wronged and cast into the sea by villagers long ago. Others thought she was something far older, something that didn't belong in this world. Charles never went out alone again. Even as he grew old, he swore the sea changed that night. On windless evenings when the water was still, he claimed he could still hear her softly whispering his name across the waves. Some legends never die, they just wait. Makes you wonder, are these just stories, or are they warnings dressed as tales, passed down by those lucky enough to survive? The truth is, the countryside holds a different kind of fear. It's not loud, it's not fast. It creeps in slowly, settling in your bones, making you question every shadow, every sound. Because out there, away from the noise of the world, there's nothing to drown out the whispers of things we don't understand. And maybe that's the point. Maybe some places were never meant for us to fully understand. Maybe some things are supposed to remain mysteries, lurking in the fields, hiding in the forests, floating on the water, waiting. So if you've ever felt a chill in a quiet place, seen something you couldn't explain on a country road, or heard your name when no one was around, you're not alone. And if you've got your own story, drop it in the comments. I want to hear what you've seen, what you've felt. Maybe you've come closer to the unknown than you ever realized. And if this is the kind of real horror you want more of, make sure you stick around. Because next time, we're diving into the world's most chilling encounters caught on camera. Moments that might just prove some fears aren't just in our heads. Remember, when the sun sets and the silence stretches out, it's not always empty out there. Sometimes, something's waiting in the dark.